A simple woman was ignored at the shooting range, until her first shot broke the champion's record. The wall clock struck 9 a.m. as Claire Whitman pushed open the glass doors of the Langston Elite Shooters Club, a place where silence carried more weight than greetings, and glances were exchanged more frequently than gunfire. Inside, the air smelled of gunpowder, polished leather, and an unspoken sense of superiority. Claire stepped in, her worn khaki jacket slightly creased at the sleeves, and her faded gray sneakers making her look like a misplaced note in an otherwise immaculate score. No one noticed her, but she wasn't surprised. Invisibility had become a familiar companion ever since she became a widow. Behind the front desk sat a platinum-haired receptionist, her makeup perfectly calibrated to reflect the club's exclusivity. She looked up briefly at Claire, just enough to register her presence, then looked away as though she had seen someone handing out flyers on the sidewalk. Claire offered a small smile, a smile that asked permission from no one. "I'd like to register for today's open practice," she said gently, her voice rough from the early Boston wind. "New members must be referred," the receptionist replied without meeting her eyes. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a slightly crumpled voucher, still legible. "Practice day, one-time entry, gifted by DL. It's a gift from a friend." The woman glanced at the card, sighed softly, then gestured. "Basic range, far end, but 25-yard limit, your own equipment only." Claire nodded. She understood the unspoken rules of places like this. You were allowed to exist, but never welcomed, at all. The center lanes, a group of men in bespoke shooting gear, were laughing loudly. Each one wielded a custom firearm that looked more like a concert violin than a weapon. Precision-tuned, monogrammed, and perfectly balanced. Leading them was Derek Langston, 7-time national champion, heir to Langston Arms, and holder of the club's all-time precision shooting record. Just as Claire passed behind them, Derek fired a clean sequence, each bullet tearing into the bullseye. Cameras clicked. Applause echoed. He removed his ear protectors and glanced around with a self-satisfied grin, then saw Claire, a woman with tied-back brown hair, a thrift store sweater, and a canvas tote bag. "Well, well," Derek said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Looks like someone wandered in from a self-defense class at Target." Laughter rippled through the group. Claire didn't flinch. She'd heard words like that all her life. At the far end of the range, Claire set down her bag, pulled out a Beretta 92, well used but immaculately clean, and began preparing it with quiet care. Her hands moved with practiced ease, like someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Because she had. From across the room, Derek was still watching, arms crossed. "I bet $100 she won't hit the third ring," one man whispered. "Make it 1,000, Derek scoffed. "I'd bet she's never even fired before." Claire looked up, not at them, but toward the target downrange. It wasn't lowered yet, but in her mind the trajectory was already mapped. Wind, distance, hand angle, sight line. She could feel the space in her bones. She picked up the gun and adjusted her posture. Left foot slightly forward, knees loose, shoulders back, hands firm. Eyes through the sights with a calm that silenced the rest of the world. "This can't be real," Derek muttered. "We've got a grocery clerk thinking she's Annie Oakley." What no one knew was that before she walked in this morning, Claire had visited her husband's grave. James Whitman, a former Marine who once told her, "If the world ever underestimates you, don't argue. Just shoot." Claire pulled the trigger. The sound was sharp and clean. One shot, no hesitation. She lowered the weapon. All eyes shifted to the slowly returning target. It stopped in front of the booth. One hole, dead center. No one spoke. Derek, whose name was carved into the record plaque, stood motionless as if something had struck deeper than pride. Claire exhaled, softly. Not because she had won anything, but because she had kept a promise. Claire had learned to read silence long before she ever learned to fire a weapon. She had spent most of her adult life as a critical care nurse in Boston, quiet in a room full of machines, steady in the middle of emergencies, calm when others collapsed. That was her gift, remaining composed while everything else fell apart. But silence wasn't always peaceful. 3 years earlier, a routine late shift ended in a detour that shattered everything she thought she understood about fear. It was past 11 p.m. when she stopped at the corner market. There were only 2 customers inside, the cashier and a man in a hooded jacket near the freezer section. Claire remembered noting how cold the air felt, unnaturally so, and how the man didn't look at the drinks he was pretending to choose. The robbery happened fast. A gun appeared. The cashier froze. And Claire, standing with a loaf of bread in one hand, suddenly became a target just for being there. "Get on the ground," the man barked. His voice shook, not from nerves but rage, like someone looking for an excuse to pull the trigger. She remembered the way the gun trembled in his grip. She remembered the smell of sweat and old beer. But mostly she remembered the helplessness. It ended without bloodshed, thanks to an off-duty officer who happened to walk in. But something inside Claire had already ruptured, something invisible, but paralyzing. James had sat beside her on the edge of their bed that night. He didn't speak at first, just held her hand until the tremors passed. He didn't try to minimize what happened. He didn't say, "It could have been worse." He looked her in the eye and said, "You were in a kill zone without cover. That's not your fault. But it doesn't have to happen again." She looked at him, puzzled. "I want you to come with me to the range. Not because I want you to be armed all the time, but because I want you to never feel helpless again." It started with one afternoon, then 2, then every Sunday. James had a calm voice, measured and steady, like someone who had seen chaos and made peace with it. A former Marine, he wasn't flashy about his service. He carried it like a quiet weight in his chest, never boasting, but never denying it either. At the range, he taught Claire how to hold a weapon, how to breathe, how to control the inevitable. Fear. Shooting, he said, isn't about aggression. It's about control of your body, of your breath, of your thoughts. That's how you stay alive. She listened. She practiced. She improved. At first, the motions felt foreign, but week after week her hands stopped trembling. Her groups tightened, her vision sharpened. Something that had once symbolized trauma became a place of calm. They were happy, in the quiet way some couples are. No grand gestures, just shared routines and private jokes, laughter over burnt toast, a familiar squeeze on the shoulder before bed, until the deployment. James had been called back as a trainer for a short rotation overseas. Just a few months, he said. Nothing dangerous. It was supposed to be safe, but safe was just a word. Claire stood alone the day she received the folded flag. The cause of death was listed as an unanticipated explosion during a training exercise. The words were clean, clinical, sanitized. But she knew James. She knew he had volunteered for missions others avoided. She knew his silence sometimes said more than a report ever could. In the weeks that followed, she avoided the range, avoided the gear, avoided everything that reminded her of him, until a package arrived 6 months later from one of James's closest friends. Inside was a note. "You promised him you'd keep practicing. Now promise yourself you'll start living again. Claire." Hadn't kept that promise right away. She tucked the note into a drawer next to his last text message. Back soon, love you more. It took 2 more years of grief before she touched a gun again. And when she did, she didn't start at a fancy range. She went to an abandoned quarry with a battered paper target and an old pistol James had once called reliable, not pretty. That was the day she realized the act of shooting wasn't about violence. It was about reclaiming space, about not letting fear take more than it already had. Back in the present, Claire stood in the basic range lane, alone, unnoticed, and dismissed. But in her mind, James's voice echoed, "If they underestimate you, let them. That just means they won't see it coming." The bullseye still hung in place. Perfect, undeniable, unforgettable. Claire stood motionless, her weapon holstered, her expression unchanged. Around her, conversations stuttered and stopped. Some spectators leaned closer, as if proximity would help them make sense of what they'd just witnessed. "Beginner's luck," someone muttered, too quietly for anyone to agree out loud. Derek Langston, however, wasn't quiet. He stepped forward, clapping slowly, the sound more sarcastic than celebratory. "Impressive," he said, voice loud enough to reclaim the room. "For someone who looks like she just wandered in from a farmer's market." Laughter bubbled from his entourage. It wasn't spontaneous. It was practiced, like backup singers waiting for their cue. Claire looked at him, not with anger, not even with challenge, but with the kind of stillness that makes others uneasy. "I just came to practice," she said calmly. "That's all." "Then practice away," Derek replied. "But don't expect us to start handing out trophies. For tourist shots." He turned, halfway done with the scene, but something in her silence seemed to stick. He turned back. "Actually," he said, drawing attention again, "let's make this interesting." Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but calculation. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "Simple," Derek said, spreading his hands like a game show host. "You line up again, same distance, same gun. If you hit another bullseye, I'll donate $10,000 to the charity of your choice. If you miss just once, you walk away, quietly, no hard feelings." Gasps stirred around the range. Someone whispered, "He's trying to humiliate her," and it was true. This wasn't about sportsmanship. It was a trap, a public challenge designed to discredit her, to turn the perfect shot into a statistical fluke. Claire paused. She didn't care about the money. She didn't care about Derek, but she cared about what he represented. The way he used skill to justify arrogance, wealth to shield ego, and performance to mask insecurity. And deep inside her, something stirred. Not pride, not vengeance, but justice. "If I win," Claire said slowly, "you donate the money to the Veterans Recovery Foundation." "Deal," Derek smirked. "Though I hope they don't spend it too soon." Rebecca Johnson, the club manager, stepped forward. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished floor. "Mr. Langston, this is highly irregular. You're putting the club's reputation on the line," Derek cut in. "Relax, Rebecca, we're just having a bit of friendly competition." He looked at Claire again. "Ready when you are, Miss Whitman," she replied softly. Claire Whitman. The name echoed faintly in the silence. Claire stepped into position again. This time the range was no longer ambient noise. It was still, watching, breathing with her. She lifted the Beretta. The weight felt familiar, grounding in her mind. She saw James, arms folded, half smiling from the side of the range. "Focus on the breath. Don't shoot the gun, let it go." She inhaled, exhaled halfway, squeezed. Crack. The paper reeled forward. Another bullseye. The room inhaled. Derek's smirk cracked. 2 out of 2, he said, straining for levity. Impressive. Very. Then, let's raise the stakes. Claire raised an eyebrow, cautious. 3 shots, 75 yards, my range, my rules. If you hit all 3, $50,000 goes to your veterans. If not, you admit you cheated, apologize to the club, and never show your face. Here again. A hush fell. This was no longer entertainment. It was a challenge wrapped in threat, dipped in humiliation. Claire looked around. Some faces looked hopeful. Others hungry. For drama. For downfall. She closed her eyes for a moment. This isn't about ego. It's about standing where others think you don't belong and refusing to move. She opened them again. Accepted, she said quietly. The crowd murmured. Rebecca leaned in, speaking low. Claire, you don't have to do this. He's setting you up. That distance, that's his specialty. Claire nodded. I know, but I didn't come here to win. I came here to stop hiding. As she walked to the longer lane, she passed a framed photograph on the wall. Derek Langston, age 29, national champion, holding his rifle like a scepter. Underneath a quote, "Precision is the mark of greatness." Claire almost smiled. Greatness, she thought, isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, waits for the noise to die down, and then rewrites the rules. The 75-yard lane was quieter than the rest. Not because it was empty, quite the opposite. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Spectators had started gathering near the glass divider. Some held their breath. Others whispered predictions like bettors at a racetrack. Rebecca Johnson stood near the edge, arms folded, eyes sharp. Derek Langston sauntered toward the bench like a man heading into a victory lap. He wore a custom shooting glove tailored for grip with his initials stitched in silver. Ladies first, he said, gesturing theatrically. Claire stepped forward, placing her bag on the table. Inside was her Beretta, still warm from the previous round. You won't be using that, Derek interrupted. New terms, club-supplied firearm. Same for both of us. Ensures fairness, right? Claire paused. She saw the glint in his eyes. Not competition. Control. Rebecca opened her mouth, but Claire raised a hand, calm and steady. Fine, she said. What weapon? Derek signaled, and a staff member rolled out a hard case. He popped it open with unnecessary flair. Inside lay a Langston Model X, a sleek, high-performance handgun, known for its unforgiving trigger and tight grip curve. Not beginner-friendly, not military standard. Claire glanced at the grip, then at the distant target. Problem? Derek asked. No, Claire replied. Just reading the terrain. She stepped up, cradling the weapon with quiet familiarity. She took a breath, longer this time. This wasn't just about the shot. It was about the message. Behind her, someone snorted. No way she lands one, let alone 3. Claire exhaled halfway, crack, the bullet split the air. Everyone waited. The target came forward, dead center. Gasps erupted. Even Derek's smirk faltered. Claire didn't smile. She simply reset her stance. Let them expect less, James had once told her. It makes your truth louder. Second shot, this time she adjusted. The recoil was sharper than expected. She compensated in the wrist. Slowed her breath. Crack. Another perfect hit. Now the crowd wasn't whispering. They were watching, really watching. Derek's jaw clenched. He walked over to Rebecca. Something's off. That gun's been calibrated wrong. Rebecca glanced at the screen. It's been checked. By your staff, twice. Derek turned, teeth grinding behind a public grin. Claire approached for the third shot, and that's when it happened. A sudden reflection. A flicker of bright light cut across her sightline. Camera flash? No, too direct. It came from somewhere near Derek's entourage. She blinked. The distraction was intentional, but Claire didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't let it live rent-free in her focus. Instead, she did what James taught her. When the pressure rises, fall back on training. Let your body remember what fear wants you to forget. She adjusted slightly, shoulders relaxed, trigger pull recalibrated. Final breath in. Crack. The range went still. The target rolled in. Bullseye. Again. The room erupted, not with polite applause, but with raw, shocked celebration. Derek stood frozen. Rebecca stepped up to the mic. Claire Whitman has hit 3 consecutive bullseyes at 75 yards with a club-supplied weapon. That exceeds the club record. Funds will be transferred to the Veterans Recovery Foundation immediately. Derek snapped, "There's no way, that flash, she had help." Claire turned. "You're right," she said quietly. "I had help. His name was James Whitman, U.S. Marine, and the finest man I ever knew." She reached into her pocket and held up a small worn metal tag. His dog tag. "I don't shoot for trophies, I shoot to keep a promise." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice firmer now. "Mr. Langston, I suggest you stop while there's still grace to salvage." But Derek wasn't done. "You all think this proves something, that she's better than me. She's a fluke, a lucky ghost." A pause. Claire walked over. She looked him in the eye. Not with triumph, but with clarity. "No, Derek, I'm not a ghost. I'm someone you didn't see coming because you never looked beyond the mirror." By sunrise the next morning, the video had already hit 1.2 million views. A grainy phone recording, Claire's final shot, the slow roll of the target, and Derek's frozen expression, was making rounds across military forums, local news, and even national veteran networks. The caption read, "Unknown woman breaks club record with military precision. Donates all to vets." Claire Whitman didn't check the view count. She was in her kitchen, steeping tea. As the morning light crept across the photo frame of her and James in hiking gear, their smiles carefree and full of sunlight, the contrast between that silence and the storm brewing online felt surreal. Her phone buzzed. Again, 17 missed calls. 3 from a local news station, 2 from military nonprofits, 1 from a retired general. She wasn't ready. She had come to the range to keep a promise, not to be a symbol. Across town, Derek Langston was wide awake in his penthouse, pacing like a man who had forgotten how to sit still. "This is spiraling," he barked into his phone. "I need background, now." His investigator was calm, practiced. Her name is Claire Whitman, 40, ICU nurse, widowed. No competitive history. No social media. Keeps to herself. "That's impossible," Derek snapped. "No one shoots like that without a background." "She was married to James Whitman," the investigator continued. "Marine. Highly decorated. KIA 3 years. Ago." Derek froze. "Whitman," he whispered. The name landed heavy. It meant something. His voice lowered. "Did he teach her?" "It's unofficial," the man replied. "But word is, yes. Former unit members said she trained regularly with him. She's a natural." The call ended. Derek stared at the glass walls of his condo, the Boston skyline stretching before him. Cold, vast, untouchable. Just like his father had once described him. "They're not cheering for her," he muttered. "They're cheering against me." Meanwhile, Claire sat at her kitchen table staring at a single unopened envelope. From the Veterans Recovery Foundation. The subject, "Formal Commendation Invitation." A handwritten note inside read, "Claire, your performance inspired dozens of struggling veterans. We'd be honored to have you speak at our next event. Colonel James R. Ford, USMC Ret. Claire traced the ink with her finger. She felt a familiar ache. This wasn't about fame. But what if this was part of James's legacy? Part of the promise? She closed her eyes. James, she whispered, I'm not you. I'm not ready for all this. But in her mind, she heard his voice. You don't need to be me. Just don't disappear. Not when someone else might need to see you standing. That night, Derek's PR team met in emergency session. One of his sponsors had already paused their campaign. A second had called asking for clarification. We suggest a formal statement, his publicist said. A donation, something redemptive. Derek's eyes burned. I'm not apologizing. That woman manipulated the moment. That's not a sport. That's theatrics. He stood, gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white, set up another match. Public, real rules, no emotion, just skill. The room fell silent. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. You think another loss won't bury you? She got lucky, Derek hissed. I'll prove it. But deep down, a seed of fear had already taken root. Because what if it wasn't luck? That same evening, Claire received a text from Michael Reeves, James's old teammate. Heard about what happened. You made the community proud. Also, be careful. Langston's not used to losing. Claire stared at the message. Her hand drifted to the worn ring on her finger, James's ring. She had become visible now, and visibility, she knew, comes with consequences. If this story resonates with you, even just a little, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to the channel. We tell these stories not for fame, but to remind us all that quiet strength still matters. Your support helps us keep that message alive. The official announcement came on a Thursday morning. A crisp, well-edited video posted by the Langston Shooters Club's social media account, complete with dramatic music and the tagline, Langston vs. Whitman, Redemption or Revolution. 10 stations, 10 weapons, 1 winner, public event, open attendance. All proceeds to veterans. It didn't take long for it to go viral. Cable news segments picked it up by noon. A military podcast called it the most satisfying rivalry of the year. Someone even mocked up a fake boxing poster. Claire in soft blue, calm and resolute. Derek in black, glaring into the void. Claire stared at the video on her phone, seated on a bench outside the hospital where she had just finished a double shift. Her scrub still smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. She hadn't agreed yet. She hadn't even been asked. But the decision was being made for her, in press kits and clickbait thumbnails. Michael Reeves called just as she was about to shut the phone off. You saw it? Everyone's seen it. You okay? Claire paused. Not sure yet. Michael was silent for a moment, then said, I know you didn't want attention, and I know this isn't what you asked for. But people are watching now, Claire. Not just because you shoot well, but because you stood up without raising your voice. That matters. That night, the Veterans Recovery Foundation released a statement. Ms. Claire Whitman has neither confirmed nor declined participation. However, we support her decision, whatever it may be, and we commend her integrity under pressure. In FICE. Private. The board had also voted. If she chose to compete, they would match every dollar raised from the event and use it to fund mental health and marksmanship therapy programs for female veterans. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just Claire versus Derek anymore. It was Claire for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told to stay quiet. Across town, Derek Langston was in a different kind of war room, lit by floor-to-ceiling monitors, analytics, and his exhausted publicist. "You're winning. Back numbers," she said. "The rebranding is working. You look composed, determined." "Good," Derek replied, still staring at a freeze frame of Claire's last shot. He wasn't thinking about optics. He was thinking about variables. "What's her weakest weapon class?" His assistant replied, "Long-range rifles. She's comfortable with sidearms and mid-range, but we found no training history on bolt-action platforms." Derek nodded slowly. Then, "That's our final station." "That's aggressive," his lawyer warned. "You're already pushing this as a fair rematch. If it looks rigged, it won't," Derek snapped. "It'll look like a test of versatility, which it should be." But he wasn't trying to test her. He was trying to break her. Claire sat on her balcony that night, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. The city lights shimmered below like reflections of all the choices she hadn't made, but had to live with. The wind whispered across the railing, and in the stillness, she felt James again. Not in memory, but in presence. That quiet sense that someone who loved you once never truly leaves. She stood, walked to the living room, and pulled out an old shoebox from the closet. Inside, a folded paper. James's training schedule, 10 weeks, 10 weapons, written in his careful, blocky handwriting. One note at the top: "No weapon is unfamiliar, just undiscovered." Claire picked up her phone and drafted her response. "To the Langston Shooters Club. I accept your invitation. I ask only one thing, that the proceeds truly go to those who need it most. I am not a competitor. I am a keeper of promises." She hit send and sat back. Outside, the city kept humming. Inside, something settled in her chest. Not fear, not pride, just clarity. There was no montage, no music, no shouting coaches, no time-lapse footage of bullets flying in slow motion. Claire's preparation didn't look like a comeback story. It looked like discipline. Every morning at 6 a.m., she slipped out of bed before the city woke, drove 45 minutes to a private outdoor range just outside Worcester, and began her training in silence. She wasn't chasing a title. She wasn't chasing revenge. She was chasing readiness. The kind James had once said lives in your hands, not your head. 10 stations, 10 different firearms, 10 different disciplines. She laid out James's handwritten schedule on a metal table, at the range now weathered at the corners. Each week he had assigned her a weapon system, a target range, a breathing protocol, and a note. Week 1, semi-auto pistol, speed without panic. Week 2, revolver, every shot counts when the count is low. Week 3, tactical shotgun, anticipate the recoil, embrace the rhythm. Week 4, compact submachine gun, close is not easy, it's fast. Think in angles. She worked through each of them methodically. No cameras, no fans. Only the sound of her breathing and the echo of lead against steel. By week 5, whispers had already begun in online forums. The widow marksman is real. Langston's trying to manipulate the format. This isn't a match. It's an expose on arrogance. Claire ignored them all. She was too busy learning the bolt action. Rifle. The weapon James had once called the piano of precision shooting. She wasn't comfortable with it. The timing was slower. The reload required more steps. Her breathing had to be exact. She failed, again and again, until one shot, one clean, silent, centered shot, reminded her. Patience was her superpower. Meanwhile, at Langston headquarters, Derek was unraveling, not publicly. But his inner circle saw it, the twitch in his fingers, the overcorrections in strategy, the sudden switch from confidence to contempt in his tone. She's gaining traction, his PR advisor warned. You're not just facing a nurse anymore. You're facing a narrative. Then change it, Derek growled. You can't, not with tweets, not with precision gear giveaways. That night Derek visited a private range. He brought in 2 trainers, 5 spotters, and the Langston prototype rifle slated for the final station. He shot brilliantly, but not perfectly. He couldn't stop thinking about her hands, how steady they had been, how quiet her eyes were. The calm he had mistaken for fragility was something else. Back on the range, Claire took a break beneath a pine tree. Michael Reeves had joined her that day, quietly observing as she ran drills. He handed her a bottle of water and sat beside her in the dirt. "How's your breath?" he asked. "Steady. Recoil. Predictable. Nerves." She looked at him. Present, but not in charge. Michael chuckled softly. James would have called that a win already. She didn't reply. She just looked out over the clearing, where her last shot had split the target's center line like a scalpel through skin. That night, Claire returned home and opened the same box she always did. The one with James's medals, a folded flag, and a note he had once left taped to their fridge after a fight. "It's okay to be quiet, but don't ever let that make you small." She placed it next to a fresh page, one she wrote that night. "I'm not fighting Derek. I'm fighting the idea that only loud people get to define strength." The call came just after dawn, from a producer at WNS National Morning News. "Claire, America wants to hear your story." She didn't say yes, didn't say no either. She just stared out the window, coffee cooling in her hand, watching the city come alive under pale orange light. The messages came next. CNN, MSNBC, a podcast called The Quiet Warrior. One message even came from a publishing house: memoir opportunity, 6 figures. Title suggestion: Steady Hands, the Claire Whitman story. It was surreal, disorienting, and a little insulting, because they weren't really asking about her. They were asking about what she meant to them, what they could turn her into. Another symbol, another digestible headline. At the hospital, her co-workers tiptoed around her with admiration bordering on awe. "You're famous now," one nurse whispered. Claire just smiled, only for something I didn't plan. But in the break room, she found a sticky note on her locker. "My sister's a Marine. She says you gave her hope." "Thank you." That one, Claire kept. Meanwhile, Derek Langston was bleeding narrative. No amount of precision shooting clips or aggressive media coaching could erase the image burned into public consciousness. A wealthy man losing his cool, while a calm widow rewrote the room with 3 perfect shots. The hashtag #EarSteadyWhitman was trending. A late-night host had referred to Derek as the man who couldn't breathe under pressure. He tried to laugh it off, but even his sponsors weren't laughing. "You need to humanize yourself," one exec told him. "Show vulnerability, cause something relatable." Derek stared at them blankly. "I'm not trying to be relatable, I'm trying to win." The exec shrugged. "Then stop making it so easy for her to be the hero." Back at home, Claire opened her inbox and found a message with the subject line: "You don't know me, but I knew James." It was from a woman named Captain Avery Lynn, a former Army markswoman, and one of the few women James had ever trained with. James always said you had the calmest hands he'd ever seen. He also said one day, if it ever came down to it, you'd teach people more with silence than most do with speeches. "I've watched your footage. You're not just carrying his skill, you're carrying his steadiness." Claire read the message 3 times. Then she replied, "Thank you. I never wanted this spotlight, but I also don't want to run from it. I just want to stand still and be seen anyway." As the competition drew near, pressure mounted from all sides. The Langston Club added more seating. Media credentials were reviewed. Security was doubled. Sponsors wanted her in branded apparel. Interviewers wanted sound bites. What's it like to go from ICU nurse to icon? Do you feel responsible for inspiring women nationwide? Is, Derek Langston symbolic of systemic elitism in American sports? Claire answered none of them. Instead, she sent one sentence to the event organizers. Please reserve 2 seats near the back row for Michael Reeves and Captain Avery Lynn. She didn't want to be the center of attention, but she wanted the right people to witness what came next. Meanwhile, Derek was unraveling in subtler, more dangerous ways. He had ordered modifications to the final station, the long-range precision rifle challenge, a minor scope adjustment, a subtle shift in the calibration. Nothing illegal, but enough to widen the margin of failure. She won't notice, his technician assured him. She won't have to, Derek replied. She'll just miss. But as he stared at the target model, something twisted in his chest. Not guilt, not yet, just fear, because if she didn't miss, he wasn't just losing a competition. He was losing control over the narrative, something he'd always believed he could shape. That night, Claire stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her hair. She didn't look like a hero. She looked tired, human, but in her eyes was something Derek would never understand. Peace without arrogance, confidence without noise, strength that didn't need witnesses to be real. The morning air was cool and dry as Claire stepped onto the Langston Elite Shooters Club grounds. The same glass doors, the same marble floor. But everything had changed. No one ignored her. Cameras followed her every step. Reporters whispered her name. And in the corner of the lobby, a young girl in a military jacket whispered to her mother, "That's her. That's Claire Whitman." Claire didn't flinch, didn't pose. She simply nodded, walked to registration, and signed her name in ink, steady handwriting, just like her shooting. In the competition arena, the stage had transformed. Tiered seating now wrapped the walls. Spotlights pointed down at the shooting lanes. 10 stations, 10 weapons, each lane marked by a digital screen broadcasting live. Scores. The event had been branded. The 10 trial match, experience versus resolve. Claire stood by herself near lane 1. She wore no logos, just a navy blue shirt, worn jeans, and the wedding ring that had never left her hand. Michael Reeves and Captain Avery Lynn sat in the back row, true to her request. No cheering, no signs, just presence. Derek entered 20 minutes later, flanked by press and polished in Langston-branded gear. He smiled too wide, waved too often, but his eyes never quite stopped scanning. When they landed on Claire, something hardened. "Nurse," he said, approaching with casual venom. "Sleep well?" Claire tilted her head, unfazed. "Enough. I always sleep well before a win." She didn't respond, because she knew something he didn't. True confidence doesn't announce itself. It just performs. The match began with a clear chime. Station 1, semi-auto pistol. Claire stepped forward. She took the weapon, loaded the magazine, took position. The crowd quieted. Crack, 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 all on target. The screen flashed, 10-10, center mass applause followed. Light at first, then building. Derek followed, matching her score. But his shoulders were tight. His smirk, rehearsed. Station by. Station? The pressure built. Station 3, tactical shotgun. Claire adjusted for the weight. Derek powered through with muscle, but missed a peripheral target. Station 5, submachine gun. Claire's footwork impressed even the military judges. Derek clipped a target, 1 point behind. By Station 7, they were tied. The room was silent, between rounds, not from politeness but from awe. No one had expected this, not really. A woman who never competed. A man who couldn't lose. Then came Station 10, the final trial. Langston prototype rifle, 300 yards, single-shot precision. Claire stepped forward. She noticed it instantly. The scope misaligned by half a degree. The trigger tension slightly heavier than regulation. Not sabotage. Sabotage meant to look like coincidence. She said nothing. She simply recalled James's notebook. Page 47. When? It's not the weapon, you know. Adapt. Center your breath, compensate, let instinct speak louder than design. She adjusted, shifted her stance, and waited. In the crowd, Michael leaned forward. The air grew still. Claire inhaled, held, exhaled slowly, halfway, and fired. The range froze. Target returning. Slow. Too slow. Then, the screen flashed. Bullseye. A collective gasp, then roaring applause. Derek's face paled. His turn. He approached the lane with stiff movements, took position, fired. His shot landed just outside the inner ring. Good, but not perfect. The scoreboard blinked once. Final result, Claire Whitman, 98.7. Derek Langston, 97.2. The silence afterward was heavier than the applause. Rebecca Johnson, club manager, stepped forward to announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a winner. Claire Whitman, by both score and character." Claire didn't raise her hands, didn't celebrate, she simply nodded. Then turned to Derek. "You're a good shot, Derek," she said, "but next time try aiming for the truth." He opened, his mouth to reply, but nothing came out, because there was nothing left to say. Afterward, Claire passed through the crowd without security. A young boy in a veteran's cap stopped her. "My dad said you shoot like someone who doesn't need to prove anything." Claire smiled. "That's the goal." She found Michael and Captain Lynn waiting outside. "It's done," she said. "No," Captain Lynn replied. "It just started." Claire nodded. She looked up at the sky, soft blue streaked with gold. Then, "I'll keep showing up. Not to win, just to remind people that being underestimated is not the same as being wrong." 2 weeks had passed since the match. Claire had returned to the hospital. Back to patients, shift rotations, and half-eaten. Granola bars between emergencies. No cameras, no fanfare, just the rhythm of ordinary life. But something had changed. People looked her in the eye more now, not with awe, not with pity, but with a quiet kind of respect. She hadn't tried to become anything more than she was. But somehow, in standing still, she had become someone people listened to. At the Veterans Recovery Foundation's next board meeting, Claire was offered a seat. "Not honorary," Colonel Ford said. "Voting, leadership, real." Claire hesitated. "I'm not a soldier," Ford leaned forward. "Neither are most of the people we help. What you brought wasn't rank. It was clarity." She accepted, not because she wanted to lead, but because she knew there were others like her, quiet, unseen, waiting for someone to prove that dignity doesn't need volume. Derek Langston, meanwhile, had disappeared from headlines. His legal team settled quietly. The Langston Club issued formal apology and donation. Derek released a single statement. "She was better. That day, and maybe many others. I thought strength was dominance. She showed me it could be stillness. No press tour, no redemption arc. Just a silence that felt, for the first time, earned." One morning, Claire visited the new training wing at the foundation, funded in part by her match's proceeds. She stood beneath a brass plaque that read, "The James Whitman Marksmanship Center, for those who carry steady hands and quiet courage. Inside, 6 veterans were lined up at the range. Some had physical scars, others invisible ones. Claire walked in, not as an icon, but as a mentor. She placed a target on the line, held up a worn Beretta. "We're not here to hit the center," she said, voice clear but soft. "We're here to learn how to hold steady when everything else wants you to shake." They nodded, and just like that, the room found its own rhythm. That night, Claire stood on her balcony holding a letter. It was handwritten. "From a teenage girl in Colorado. I saw your video. I'm not good at sports or school, but I like how calm you were. My mom says I remind her of you. I used to hate that. Now I think, maybe it's not such a bad thing to be quiet." Claire smiled. She placed the letter next to James's notebook. 2 voices separated by time, but connected by purpose. She didn't need medals, or headlines, or fan mail. She just needed the world to know. Sometimes the loudest people in the room aren't the strongest. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who show up anyway. Not to be seen, but to keep a promise. And in keeping that promise, they become impossible to forget. The end. But perhaps just the beginning. In a world that often mistakes volume for value, Claire Whitman reminded us that strength can be quiet, steady, and unshakable. If her story touched something in you, something personal, something true, don't let it end here. Share it, comment below, and subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet heroes among us.